This episode profiles Mexican Mafia members from the harbor area of Los Angeles. The tentacles of the Mexican Mafia extend to every region of Southern California. The M has a long-time historical representation from gang members originating from the LA harbor area. The number one gang represented on the M map from this vicinity comes from the Wilmas neighborhood, located in the city of Wilmington. The first four harbor area M members, all from Wilmas, joined in the 1960s, and each OG is shown here, beginning with Ruben Sapo Valdez, born on October 18, 1942, the first South Harbor area member to join La M. After serving years at San Quentin, Sapo was paroled in the mid-1970s and died of a heroin overdose on February 28, 1975, at the age of 32. Steve Calote Amador, one of 7 M representatives from Wilmas, was born on August 23, 1943, and was the next to be recruited from the harbor area. Serving the majority of his time in the 60s and 70s at San Quentin and Folsom, Calote was notorious for his rumbles in the lockup units with inmate adversaries and correctional officers. Gangsters and political activists were polar opposites. Therefore, like many of us in La M, Calote was not overly fond of left-wing socialist radicals who attempted to unify Mexican and black prison gangs because it served their anti-establishment agenda. After Cheyenne Cadena's killing in December of 1972 at Chino State Prison, it was Calote who directed the stabbings of 2 Nuestra Familia brothers that served as the trigger setting off the retaliation hit on Cheyenne. Many of the fellas developed an even deeper sour taste for these extremists. This included Donna James, a self-proclaimed Puerto Rican revolutionary who corresponded regularly with Cheyenne and many other prison gang members during the turbulent 1970s. Respected by his rivals and staff members, Calote paroled in the mid-1970s. In an ironic twist, he hooked up and married Donna James, the attractive female revolutionary, and lived happily with his new wife and daughter until, you guessed it, the M killer reared its ugly head. Calote passed away from heroin-related causes. The next to join in the 60s was Pedro Bogus Pete Nunez. Bogus was born on January 1, 1941, and is the eldest M member from Wilmas to join. Bogus Pete was ruthless in his treatment of San Quentin convicts and was one of the reasons for the 1968 Mexican-American convict insurrection known as the Shoe War. Bogus was one of dozens of M members already in B section, or the Adjustment Center, for various disciplinary infractions when the Shoe War kicked off on the main line. He would parole in the early 1970s and was never heard from again. Because there was, and is, a death oath in place, it is usually wise to leave the life quietly and without fanfare, if that's your intention. Because the fellows prefer willing participants, there is no dishonor in a carnal exercising a self-imposed retirement so long as they stay away. The last of the 4 Wilmas OGs to join in the 60s was Raymond Bevito Alvarez, who bounced from San Quentin to Tehachapi to Folsom and other CDC penal facilities. Bevito saw action at almost every facility and was convicted of the 1969 Soledad slaying of BGF member Dopey Dan inside the Adjustment Center's O-Wing unit. The 1972 group photo shown here is at the Tehachapi Correctional Facility, where he sponsored new recruit Sana Ojeda. Later in life, Bevito would become embroiled in M politics and was targeted for internal execution. When Bevito got wind his days were numbered, he locked up at Chino Palm Hall, following a botched attempt on his life. Bevito Alvarez would live to enjoy his old age as a free man. Today, at 72 years of age, his whereabouts is unknown. The 1970s would produce 6 Mexican Mafia members from the Harbor area, 4 from San Pedro, 1 from Harbor City, and another Wilmero from Wilmas. The most prominent from this collection was Donaldo Stoney Galaz from San Pedro, who is still active and as of 2020 is housed at Kern Valley State Prison. Born on September 5, 1949, Stoney received his nickname due to his rugged facial terrain. His stone-faced look, as far as back as I can recall, complemented his voice. Stoney was like the Godfather's Luca Brasi, but with more brains. He spoke like the Terminator before there was a Terminator. To be clear, for those of you who don't understand how I can use modern terms to describe older dudes, Stoney had this robotic voice completely void of emotion. Even when Stoney laughed, it sounded programmed from a Schwarzenegger audio soundtrack. Cara de Piedra, Spanish for Face of Stone, was recruited at DVI in 1971 by Richie Reese from Bakersfield. Stoney was one of a dozen MM members brought on board, the largest concentration of recruits made at one time by one sponsor in La M's history. We call them the Young Guns. Stoney left a trail of blood inside the California prison system, a bundle of rage that led by example and was always on the front lines. My favorite Stoney story actually came from an old-time member of the prison gang task force. Stoney was in the El Monte jail, suspected of a few homicides, and the task force guys were trying to roll him. Big Steve decided to use the good guy tactic. He asked Stoney if he liked sports. Stoney said he did indeed love baseball. Thinking he was making headway with his charm, Big Steve pressed on and asked what he specifically enjoyed about baseball. Stoney replied the best part about baseball was getting hits. He placed an emphasis on the word hits, dragging out the S and eyeballing Big Steve with a crazy look that communicated everything. As Stoney smiled with satisfaction, the interview was terminated. Big Steve said he wanted to go back into the interview room and strangle him. In 1977, Stoney paroled and experimented with bank robberies. Unfortunately for Stoney, some piece of excrement, an affectionate term I was labeled, served him up to the task force. On October 7, 1977, he was arrested with several others and convicted of bank robbery. The devil would love for me to feel bad about guys like Stoney, who I used to love in that world. My prayer is that Stoney and guys like him, especially the guys I ran with, some who I gave up, will commit their souls to the Lord upstairs. I may not be the right messenger to speak this to these men, so maybe they'll listen to Kilroy, Conejo, Johnny Green Eyes, Pretty Bob, and others who never debriefed. God bless you, Stoney. The next 3 San Pedro gang members to join La M's exclusive fraternity were Alex Espinosa, Charles Sapo Mendoza, and George Chapulín Carabajal, all recruited in the 1970s. Alex served all of his prison time in California and died of a heroin overdose in the late 1970s. Sapo was Stoney's crime partner and fellow homeboy. He was also part of the bank robbery team arrested in Hawthorne in 1977. After his federal conviction, Sapo was recruited by the fellas in the feds, where he did several years and has since passed away. Chapulín was in the California and Arizona prison systems and passed away in 2005. Before we get to the Pepsi generation members from the Harbor area, there were 2 others recruited in the 1970s. Pete Chacon, also known as Pretty Pete, was the Harbor City representative. Pretty Pete was recruited at San Quentin and functioned on the outside with Stoney Galaz and the Eme crew operating in the Harbor area. Pretty Pete was executed in 1976 by Mexican Mafia shooters for disrespecting Stoney. John Charlie Brown Rabaca from Wilmas was born on September 30th, 1946, and was recruited in the late 1970s. On May 14th, 1977, following the viewing of a movie at the Chino Reception Center, Nuestra Familia member William Gonzalez was stabbed to death by Charlie Brown and Ernest Kilroy Roybal. To the victim's credit, he did not seek protective custody, but maybe thought he could navigate under the radar. During a period in which the NF and MA members had been successfully separated from each other by prison authorities, this inmate made a terrible mistake in not making a preemptive strike. Anyone entering shark-infested waters, with nothing but enemy inmates populating a prison yard, would never think twice about getting off first. Instead, he became a sitting duck and paid with his life. Charlie Brown pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a sentence of 5 years to life. Kilroy escaped without being prosecuted. The Pepsi generation is a term I like to use to describe a new generation of Mexican Mafia members who revolutionized the manner in which La M conducts business to this day. These men have been successful in harnessing the criminal talent on the streets, especially throughout Southern and Central California. The M program as we know it today had its genesis in the 1990s and continues to this very day. The two most recent and prominent M members from the LA Harbor area were Gabriel Sleepy Huerta and Emiliano Tonito Lopez from Wilmas. Both men were very influential members who controlled street territories in their hometown of Wilmington, California, and beyond, from their prison cells. Like all Mexican Mafia members, street facilitators successfully implement MS street law and generate hundreds of thousands of annual revenue for these big homies who simply direct their revenue streams from their prison cells. The more prominent of the two Wilmas homeboys is Gabriel Sleepy Huerta, a soon-to-be 61-year-old lifer who was born on February 7, 1959. A made member since the 1980s, according to Mexican Mafia dropouts who defected over the past few decades, Sleepy's most recognized hit for the M took place on May 17, 1988, when he stabbed his cell partner to death at the correctional facility at Tehachapi. Nico Velasquez was a longtime member who became the recipient of internal politicking and fell out of favor with his fellow carnales. Nico was found stabbed to death with one shot to the heart, earning Sleepy the nickname The Professional. With no eyewitnesses to say otherwise, Sleepy claimed self-defense and the local county district attorney refused to prosecute. In 2017, Sleepy was denied 15 years to his next parole board appearance, which will make him 73 years of age when he comes up for his next review. Emiliano Lopez was known as Tonito from Wilmas, and his life paralleled Sleepy's. Both originated from the same neighborhood, were housed together at Pelican Bay State Prison, and joined forces to oversee common street gang territories from behind bars. When it was discovered Tonito's wife had worn a wire and recorded phone calls and communications of MA business meetings, Tonito was held responsible. On July 10, 2016, 9 months after this prison photo was taken, Tonito was murdered at the Calipatria State Prison by Sureño gang members at the direction of Mexican Mafia members who supervised the attack. The killing of Tonito Lopez by Sureños not only set a dangerous precedent, but it violated an MA rule in which only a made member could take out a fellow member. It highlights a potential change in MA policy. It also confirms that Mexican Mafia rules are theirs to make, break, enforce, and alter at their whim. At the end of the day, who is going to penalize them for these infractions? When I think about the prison gang life, there is a popular proverb that applies so appropriately. It says, "There is a way that appears to be right for a man, but in the end it leads to death." Not natural death, not accidental death, not justifiable death, but answering to a gang code that targets you for execution no matter what your status may be. Many apologists will justify the life by stating they knew the rules of the game, or if you play, you gotta pay. Although that is true to some extent, the rules are constantly changed as the game progresses. Sorta like my dysfunctional uncle who gets his poker hand dealt to him, then declares which cards are wild. In the end, only certain people win. Through the decades, 4 men from San Pedro, 7 from Wilmas, and 1 from Harbor City, 12 total members from the LA South Harbor area, have been chosen to be Mexican Mafia members. 5 are deceased from drug-related reasons. 2 were murdered for internal purposes. 2, Charlie Brown and Bogus Pete, have an unknown current status. 1, Bevito Alvarez, has dropped out and disappeared, and 2 are still active. They be Stony from San Pedro and Sleepy from Wilmas. In the future, I will continue to attempt to get your comments and questions in a timely manner. Be advised that Perplexed News does monitor viewer comments for inappropriate content such as language and banging, and thus I will never see those remarks. Probably not interested in them anyway. Perplexed News exercises its discretion to delete or pass on such comments. Also, for obvious security purposes, I do not respond to personal attempts at contacting me in any manner whatsoever. Thank you for understanding, and God bless you all, even the haters.